He wrote the pH at 7.2, then the lab blew the breaker and the hallway filled with alarms. Years later, the chemistry log reappears. Same experiment, same minute, two different hands pretending to agree. A strip of litmus dried to the wrong shade, micro scratches on a glass stir rod, and a training copy of procedures tucked in a supply room drawer start talking louder than anyone did that night. The chemistry log. The lab smelled like lemon cleaner and things that used to be dangerous. They'd resurfaced the counters after the incident, replaced the hood sash, and posted the sign every school posts when a story costs more than a new faucet. Safety is a culture. In a plastic bin labeled Archive, Science, I found the old chemistry log, a composition book with a black and white marble cover furred at the edges by years of hands. On November 12, 1998, the page for Period 7 carried an entry neat enough to pass inspection. Titration, acetic acid, initial pH 7.2, endpoint reached at 9.8 milliliters, instructor present. The handwriting was as tidy as a brochure. Under raking light, the fibers told a different version. The numbers lived on top of shallow grooves that didn't line up cleanly with the ink. If you side shade with a soft pencil, pressure wakes shadows. 2 sevens rose for the initial pH, one narrow and deep, slanting right, one broader and lighter, standing straighter, like a teacher's example. The minute, 12:43, had a dot made by a resting nib above the 2 that the inked line failed to cover, as if the groove came first and the sentence learned to behave later. The breaker had tripped at 12:47 that day. A pump hiccuped in the hallway, and the fire panel chirped the way schools chirp when adults remember what it's for. They said no one was hurt. They said a student left a hot plate on low and a solvent flashed. They said the log was fine. I tracked down the teacher, now retired, with a garden full of tomatoes too stubborn for the climate. Mrs. Hale's hands were nicked with little white scars you only get in rooms where glass is a language. She poured tea and did the thing people do when an old knight unknots itself. They opened the drawer where they kept the parts that didn't fit the report. From it, she took a zip-top bag with a glass stir rod, etched along its length with micro scratches in one direction, and a folded page labeled Chem 201. Protocures, training copy. The typo felt deliberate, as if the truth had leaned its weight against the D and it had decided to be E anyway. We were told to tidy for the board, she said, not unkindly. A compiled log reads like a hymn. Parents sleep to hymns. The real book, it stutters. The stir rod told on the timeline. Scratches run the way a hand does. The pattern on this one matched a left-handed student gripping too close to the tip and stirring clockwise fast. How you stir when you think speed fixes concentration. The roster for Period 7 had one lefty who wrote his sevens with a flat top. In the grooves under 7.2, the sevens were flat. In the ink above, they had points. I found Gabe 2 towns over, sleeves of tattoos like hydrangeas tangled with lightning. He laughed straight through the part where I said who I was and why. I dreamed about that eye wash station for a decade, he said. I still smell vinegar when it rains. He remembered writing 7.2 with the question mark squeezed like a wince, then crossing it to 6.8 after the meter drifted back down from a spike. He remembered Mrs. Hale putting her hand over his and saying, "Let's breathe." He did not remember 7.2 without the question mark. The school kept a second version of the log in a binder with pastel tabs for each period. Compiled, someone wrote on the spine with a teacher's penmanship. The November page read smoother, the kind of smooth you can't get without ironing the day. Initial PH 7.2, endpoint 9.8. Equipment failure reported at 12:47, no deviation from procedure. At the bottom, a neat signature. M. Hale, and below it in smaller letters, Reviewer. A watermark ghosted across each page. Training. In the back prep room, behind a door that hated its hinges, the safety data sheets lived in slumped binders. A small cardboard box sat where brittle gloves go to turn into future dust. Inside, a fan of pH strips stuck together by old humidity. The strip on top wore a tide mark, half pale, half stained, and the stained band matched the color for 6 to 7, not 7 to 8. There was a faint square of clean paper on the wall where a laminated sheet had once hung and shielded the paint from the day the beaker burped. Salt stops where paper lives. So does truth sometimes. I asked the district about compiled logs. A man whose tie felt like it belonged to a narrower neck said compilation helps us reflect the program rather than the outlier. Program is a holy word in schools. It invites compliance the way hymns invite harmony. He said insurance likes clean records. He said parents panic. He did not mention left-handed kids who learn to write sevens both ways to pass a class. When we scanned the original log at high resolution, the pressure map sang. The line, "Instructor present," was inked over a very shallow groove that wasn't there until the compiled copy's language needed it. On the tape from that day, the one the district said did not exist, the one Mrs. Hale produced from a shoebox with old slips for beakers and meters, you can hear chaos conducted competently, her voice counting while the breaker reset, a student reading the meter aloud like a prayer, 6.9, 7.1, 6.8. At 12:46:55, the fire panel chirped and someone swore where swearing isn't taught. At 12:48:10, water rushed into a glass basin that had been rinsed enough times to memorize fear. We met in the lab after hours, permission granted by someone who didn't invite lawyers. Gabe stood at the bench and held the stir rod like a truce, knuckles a little too white. Mrs. Hale set the original log beside the compiled copy. Under a desk lamp, the grooves rose like riverbeds. I slid tracing paper over the 7.2 and shaded, letting the sevens argue in graphite. I wrote the neat one, Mrs. Hale said, for the binder after the meeting. They wanted to show fidelity. I wanted my kids not to be a problem. I am sorry I smoothed you. Gabe laughed once, not the kind you share. You kept me from dumping a carboy of base into a sink with acid in it, he said. You get to write neat on a Wednesday if you want. He touched the groove with a fingertip and drew back like it could burn again. But the book should carry both hands. The change we asked for was small, which is how change enters buildings with bells. Originals boxed and sealed before compilation. Compiled copies watermarked training, not record. Any replacement entry must note the time it was made, the reason, and carry both signatures. It felt like writing labels on jars and hoping mice learned to read. When we left, the hallway smelled like lemon cleaner again, but now it also smelled like paper that had been allowed to be ugly. The new students would inherit benches that didn't know their names. They would inherit a book that did. I stood at the window in the stairwell where the janitor's cart always rests and watched the sky go the color of a pH strip when you breathe on it. In the lot, A father idled with the radio low, and the wipers doing that little extra swipe they do when they're trying to be helpful. We like compiled stories because they are gentle. We like true ones because they are strong. In a drawer somewhere, there is always a rod with scratches that point the way a hand moved when it was scared and working anyway. In a book, there is always a minute that would prefer to be round. The groove says otherwise. It is not a condemnation. It is a record of care. Not perfect, but pressure true. Left behind by people who kept acid from finding base and then went home to live lives where most minutes are not written down.